The first king of Israel, Saul. In our last story, Israel cried out for a king. Israel, God's chosen people, shouted and begged for a king to rule over them. Despite Samuel's warnings, Israel desired for a man to reign over them completely and protect them from their enemies. Now we see God acknowledging their desires by raising up a king. For Israel's first king, God chooses Saul. And with Saul begins a story that would pave the way for God's true king and savior. In the tribe of Benjamin was a man named Saul. Saul was the son of a wealthy man named Kish. Saul was tall and broad-shouldered. He stood a head above the rest of his tribe and was one of the most handsome men in all of Israel. Despite Saul's stature, wealth, and good looks, he was a relatively humble young man. He enjoyed tending to his father's land. One day, one of Kish's donkeys went missing, so he sent Saul out to look for it. Saul and his servant went looking for the donkey and searched all the nearby villages to no avail. When they ventured through the land of Zuph, days had passed, and Saul grew worried. Saul said to his servant, "We should return. I am sure my father is more anxious about our safety than the donkeys." Saul's servant stopped him and said, "I heard that there is a man of God in this city. The people hold him in high esteem. Maybe he can tell us where we should go." So the two men gathered some gifts to bring to the prophet. They went up the hill to the city that rested above. As they were on their way, God came to Samuel and said, "I have heard the people's cries for a king. Tomorrow I will reveal to you Israel's first king. He shall deliver my people from the Philistines." The next day Samuel saw Saul and his servant approaching his home. God whispered to Samuel, saying, "There is the man who shall restrain my people." Saul approached Samuel. He stood a few feet above him, and his smile was infectious. Clearly Saul was a man of charisma. Someone people would not mind following. "Where might I be able to find the prophet?" Saul asked politely. "I am the prophet," Samuel answered. Without prompting or explanation, Samuel took Saul and said, "Go up before me to the high place where we make sacrifices. Today you and I shall eat together, and I will reveal the deepest desires of your mind." Saul was confused by the request, for all he wanted to do was ask about his donkeys. Before Saul got a chance to ask, Samuel said, "As for your donkeys, it is a stupid thing to worry about. They were found while you were gone." Saul was dumbfounded. Not only did this prophet know about his donkeys, but he wanted to eat with him near the altar of God. "I am from the least of the tribes of Israel. Why do you speak with me this way?" Saul asked. Without an answer, Samuel took Saul up to the hall. He asked the cook to prepare a meal, and Saul sat down with Samuel among 30 other people. They spent the night there, and Saul lay awake, wondering what was happening to him. An anxious excitement rushed over Saul, though he did not know why. The prophet spoke to him in riddle and ambiguity, so Saul waited patiently to find out why he was being kept. Samuel sent Saul's servant back home, and took Saul on a walk through the streets of the city. It was still dawn, and the sunlight trickled in through the alleys. The city was still quiet and undisturbed. Samuel and Saul walked silently in the coolness of morning. Samuel took Saul up to a secluded place. The sun was breaking over the horizon, and the people were stirring below in the city. The two of them sat on a rock and looked down at the people. The men and women of the city began their work, while the children played on the streets. It was a beautiful sight. Samuel took a flask of oil and poured it over Samuel's head. Samuel kissed him on the cheek and said, "God has anointed you to be the king over his people." Saul's eyes widened, but he did not say a word. Samuel continued, saying, "You shall reign and rule over God's people. The Lord has appointed you to save them from the fist of their enemies." On that hill, God gave Saul a new heart. Saul welled up with love and affection for the people of Israel, and he was filled with the Spirit of God. 7 days later, Samuel called the people of Israel together. A sea of people stood before him, and the crowd hung on every word Samuel said. Samuel spoke for God as a prophet, and said, I brought you out of Egypt, and since then I have delivered you from every kingdom that sought to oppress you. But today you have rejected your God. You seek a king to rule over you instead of me. You will have the blessings and curses that come from having a man rule over you. So Samuel brought Saul up from the tribe of Benjamin. He stood tall, and his head was above the entire crowd. Saul looked upon the people, eyes wide and afraid. Behold, Samuel shouted, your king! The people roared in applause. Trumpets blared as the people erupted in shouts of praise. The earth shook below Saul because of the sound. In one voice he could hear the crowd chant, Long live the king! Samuel read Saul the duties of kingship before the people, and he vowed to rule and protect them for all his days. Mighty men of Israel rose up from among the crowd to pledge their loyalty to Saul, and from there he departed to his home, ready to take on the Philistine army. Some doubted Saul's ability to lead and despised him, yet Saul had spent plenty of time doubting himself, so he paid no attention to their protests. Saul held his peace and readied his sword and shield. With a deep breath and calm spirit, Saul began his march against the enemies of God.